I heard the railing go before I heard her. It's a specific sound. Old galvanized pipe letting loose. A low pop, and then a long metallic slither as 40 feet of handrail peels away from its posts. I was standing on my own dock at 11 at night in an early season ice storm, checking mooring lines because the river had come up 18 inches since dinner, and the sound came from upstream where the footbridge crosses at the Narrows. Then the second sound. Not a scream. People don't scream when they hit water that cold. It knocks the air out of you, and what comes out afterward is smaller and worse than a scream. I want to be honest about what I did next, because there's a version of this story where I'm brave and that version isn't true. I didn't think about it. I have lived on this river for 11 years, and I have pulled 2 dogs, 1 canoe, and an entire floating dock out of it, and my body was already moving before any part of me had an opinion. What I did do, the one thing that mattered, was take the throw bag off the post at the end of the dock instead of going in after her. She was maybe 60 feet out and moving because the river was up and running hard and she'd gone in above the Narrows. I got downstream of her along the bank, which took 11 or 12 seconds that I don't remember at all, and I threw the bag across her and she got a hand on the rope. That's the entire rescue. It isn't cinematic. A man on a bank, a rope, and a woman with enough left in her to close a fist. Getting her up the bank was harder than getting her out of the water. She couldn't help. That's the part people don't understand about cold. She'd been in maybe 90 seconds, and her hands had already stopped taking instructions. I got her under the arms and hauled her up through the mud and got her into my truck with the heat running, before I let myself think about anything at all. I'm Wilder Adair, 34, and I restore wooden boats out of a converted boathouse about a quarter-mile downstream of that footbridge. I called 911 from the truck. I want to be specific about this because it's the part that actually kept her safe. And it wasn't me. The dispatcher told me the county had 4 active calls, that the river road was underwater at 2 points, and the bridge road was sheeted in ice, and that an ambulance was 40 to 50 minutes out at best. Then she asked me a series of questions and gave me a series of instructions and stayed on the line for 19 minutes while I followed them. Is she conscious? Is she talking? How long was she in? Can she tell you her name? She could not tell me her name. That was the answer to question 4 for the first 6 minutes, and I could hear the dispatcher recalibrate around it. Get her out of the wet clothes. Dry her. Blankets, layers, cover the head. Warm room, not a hot shower. Do not put her in hot water. Do not rub her arms and legs. Do not give her anything to drink that isn't warm and non-alcoholic. Keep her horizontal. Watch her breathing and tell me if it changes. If she stops shivering and gets sleepy, that's worse, not better, and you call me back immediately. I asked her to explain that last part because it was the opposite of what I'd assumed, and she explained it in about 11 words while I was cutting a coat sleeve off with kitchen scissors. I did all of that in my own front room with a stranger who was too cold to say her own name for the first 6 minutes. The wet clothes were the hard part, and I want to be straightforward about it rather than tiptoeing. She was hypothermic and soaked, and the instruction was unambiguous, and I did it the way you'd want anyone to do it. Fast, functional, blankets going on as things came off, talking the whole time so she knew where I was and what I was doing, and every single thing done in the order a dispatcher on an open line told me to do it. She apologized twice during it. I told her twice to stop. Her name was Bridie. She got that out somewhere in minute 7, along with a third apology, which I want on the record as the single most unnecessary thing anyone has ever said to me. You're apologizing to a man who threw a rope. I'm apologizing for the rope, the truck, the floor, and the coat. Her teeth were going hard enough that it took her about 9 seconds to get the sentence out. I'll do the rest when I can talk. There isn't a rest. There's a long list, mister, I don't know your name, which is also going on the list. The ambulance never came. Around 1 in the morning, dispatch called back to say the river road had closed entirely and to ask about her condition, and by then she was shivering hard, which the dispatcher was pleased about, because it meant her body had come back online and talking in full sentences, and holding a mug of warm tea with two hands that mostly worked. They told me to get her to the clinic first thing in the morning, regardless of how she felt. I said I would. She said, from under 3 blankets, that she didn't need a clinic, and the dispatcher and I ignored her simultaneously, which was the first thing Bridie Sullivan and I ever disagreed about. I gave her a wool sweater of mine because everything she'd been wearing was in a heap by the door, and I don't own anything smaller. It came down past her thighs. She fell asleep on my couch at some point after 2. I slept in the chair. I want to be clear about that, not because I'm noble, but because the dispatcher had told me to check on her breathing every hour, and I was not going to be the man who slept through that. At dawn, she was standing in my kitchen. I woke to the sound of a kettle and came through, and she was at my counter in my sweater, with her hair salt-stiff from river water, going through my cupboards with the specific, unembarrassed thoroughness of someone who has decided that the social contract broke last night and hasn't been repaired yet. You have 4 kinds of tea and no coffee. I don't drink coffee. That's a moral failing. I've made tea. It's the good one. I've used the good one. She put a mug on the counter and pushed it toward me. I've been standing here for about 20 minutes trying to work out how to start this conversation, and I still don't have it, so I'm going to just go. Okay. You pulled me out of a river. She had both hands on the counter, and I don't know how to say thank you for that in a way that's the right size. Everything I've thought of is either too small or so big. It's embarrassing. I've been standing in a stranger's kitchen for 20 minutes doing arithmetic on it. There isn't a right size. That's not how it works. That's a very generous thing to say, and it does not help me at all. She picked up her own mug and didn't drink from it. Can I ask you something, and will you answer it honestly? Probably. Was I close? I thought about lying. It would have been easy, and she'd have known. You were in about 90 seconds. That's not close. But if the rope had gone wide, or if you hadn't got a hand up when you did, you'd have been round the bend and into the deep water below the Narrows before I could get down there. I picked up the tea. So, no. But not by an enormous distance. She nodded slowly, both hands round the mug. Thank you for not making it smaller than it was. You'd have known. I'd have known. She looked out at the river through my window, which at 7 in the morning in late October is not much to look at. Everyone's going to make it smaller than it was. I can already feel it coming. My mother's going to make it a funny story by Thursday. Is that bad? It's not bad. It's just going to happen to me, and I don't get a vote. She finally drank the tea. This is why I've been standing in your kitchen for 20 minutes. You're the only other person who was there. Here's what you need to know about Bridie Sullivan before anything else happens. She's 31. She teaches 7th and 8th grade science at the middle school in town. She crossed, that footbridge twice a day, morning and evening, because it cuts 11 minutes off the walk from her side of the river to the school. And she had reported that railing. Twice. Once in April by phone and once in September in writing. And she had the reference number for the second one because Bridie Sullivan is the kind of person who keeps the reference number. I found that out at the clinic that morning, where I drove her, where they checked her over and told her she'd been extremely lucky, and that the sweater and the blankets and the not putting her in a hot shower had been the correct calls, and where she spent the entire wait time on the phone with the county in a voice I would come to know well. I don't want an apology. I want the bridge closed today. Today. Not assessed, closed. There are children who use that crossing at 7:40 in the morning, and the railing is on the riverbed. A pause. Reference number 4471, filed the 11th of September, and I'd like that in whatever you're writing down. She hung up and looked at me. Sorry, I'm not usually like this. You're exactly like this. I've known you 9 hours and I'd have bet money. She almost laughed and then didn't, and I watched her file something away. The bridge closed that afternoon. I want to describe the 4 months that followed, because they were the strangest 4 months of my life, and I spent most of them not understanding what was actually happening. She came back. That's the short version. She came back a week later with the sweater washed and folded, and I told her to keep it because it was 40 years old and I have 3. And she looked at it in her hands like I'd handed her a bill. She came back the week after that with a casserole, then a bottle of something, then, in the third week, with a genuinely enormous bag of hardware store screws in the size I'd mentioned once, in passing, that I could never find locally. And every single time, the visit was excellent, and the leaving was strange. We got on. That's the thing. We got on immediately and completely, in a way I have had maybe twice in my adult life. She'd sit on an upturned crate in the boat shop while I worked and tell me about 13-year-olds, and she was funny about them without ever being unkind about them, which is a very narrow line, and she walked it every time. I'd tell her about the boat, a 1954 Lyman I'd been rebuilding for 2 years for a man who visited it the way you'd visit a relative, and she asked real questions. In November, she brought her 8th grade class down to the shop. It was her idea, and she cleared it through the school and made me fill in 2 forms. And 22 13-year-olds stood in my boat shop for 90 minutes while I explained steam bending and why a plank that's been soaked and clamped will hold a curve for 60 years. I want to describe one thing from that afternoon, because it's when I knew. A boy at the back, who had said nothing for an hour, and who Bridie had told me beforehand said nothing in any class ever, asked how you know when the wood is ready to bend. And Bridie, who was leaning on the doorframe, who had spent the entire 90 minutes not intervening once, went completely still. She didn't say anything, didn't look at him, didn't make it a moment. She just stood there with her arms crossed and let the question be his. I answered it properly, at length, and he asked a second one. Afterward, when they'd gone, she sat down on the crate and put her head back against the wall. 9 weeks, she said. That's 9 weeks of that kid saying nothing. You didn't react at all. If I'd reacted, he'd never do it again. She closed her eyes. That's the entire job, Wilder. Not reacting at the right moment. Nobody thinks that's a skill. But she never stayed as long as she wanted to. I could see her decide to leave. Every visit, about 20 minutes before she went, something would come down behind her eyes and she'd start the process of going, and then she'd go. I finally asked her about it in November. Can I say something that might be wrong? Those are my favorite kind. You leave in the middle. I set the plane down. Every time, we'll be halfway through something and there's a moment where you decide, and then you're gone 20 minutes later. And I can't tell if I'm doing something or if it's you. She was quiet long enough that I started to apologize. It's me, she said. It's entirely me, and it's genuinely humiliating, and I'd rather not. Okay. That's it, okay? You said you'd rather not. I'm not going to sit here and pry it out of you as a favor to myself. She put her hands over her face for a second. Then she took them away. I can't be in debt to people. I know how it sounds. My family is very good at ledgers. Everything in my house growing up had a number on it. Favors had numbers, and I got extremely good at never being on the wrong side of one. She was looking at the floor. And you pulled me out of a river. There is no number. There's nothing I can do that touches it. I've brought you a casserole, Wilder. I've brought you screws. I liked the screws. Don't, please, she said it quietly. Here's the actual problem. I like you. I've liked you since the kettle, and I can't tell. I genuinely cannot tell. And I've tried. Whether I like you, or whether I'm just a person who was drowning 4 months ago and you were the last face I saw and my whole nervous system has decided your safety. She finally looked up. That's not love. That's imprinting. Ducklings do that. I want to be honest about my answer, because it was the best thing I said in the entire 4 months, and it was almost entirely luck. Then let's find out. How? I have no idea. But I'd rather spend a year not knowing with you than have you decide it for both of us in my boat shop on a Tuesday. Something changed after that conversation, even though nothing was decided by it. She stopped leaving in the middle. She'd come down on Sunday afternoons with a stack of lab reports to mark and stay until it got dark, and neither of us made anything of it. I started keeping the tea she liked, not as a gesture, just because I'd bought it once and then kept buying it, which is how most real things start. One Sunday in December, she fell asleep on the crate. I want to describe this properly because it's the smallest thing in this entire story, and I think about it as much as I think about the river. She'd been marking for 2 hours, and I looked over at some point and she'd gone, head back against the wall, papers still on her lap, red pen still in her hand. It was about 4 degrees in that shop with the stove going. I took my coat off the hook and put it over her, and I stood there for a second afterward with a completely stupid problem, which was that putting a coat over a sleeping woman is either nothing at all or it's a debt, depending entirely on who's counting, and I had spent 2 months learning that she counts. So I moved the stove closer to the crate, which was an unreasonable amount of trouble and looked like a job, and went back to work. She woke up 40 minutes later, looked at the coat, looked at the stove, which was now in a position no reasonable man would have chosen for any reason involving the boat, and didn't say anything at all. She just picked up the red pen and carried on. That's the closest either of us got, in 4 months, to admitting what was happening. Her parents came in January. I got about 40 minutes warning, a text from Bridie that said, "My parents are here and they want to come and see you, and I have tried everything. I am so sorry. They will be there at 4. They were lovely. I want to say that clearly. Aiden and Nuala Sullivan drove 3 hours. They were warm and funny, and Nuala had brought a fruitcake, and Aiden spent 20 minutes on the Lyman asking exactly the right questions about steam bending, and I liked them both enormously. Nuala cried twice in the first 10 minutes, apologized both times, and then told me a story about Bridie at 7 years old refusing to accept a lift home from a neighbor in the rain because, in her words, then I'd owe her. 7, Nuala said. She walked 1.5 miles in it, came in soaked through and completely delighted with herself. Behind her, Bridie was looking at the floor with an expression I couldn't read. And then, at the door, Aiden took out a folded check and held it out to me. I did not look at the number. I want to be precise about that. I never looked at it, then or since. I know it was 4 figures because Bridie told me later. "We'd like you to have that," he said. "There's no version of this where it's enough. We're aware." Behind him, Bridie had gone completely white. "I appreciate it," I said. "I can't take it. Wilder, I know why you're offering and it's the right instinct, and I'd probably do the same. I still can't take it." I kept my hands where they were. If I take that, then what happened in October becomes a thing that got settled. And it doesn't get settled, it just happened, and your daughter's alive and that's the whole of it. You've a boat shop that could use the money. I've a boat shop that could use the money, and I'm still not taking it. Nuala started crying again. Aiden put the check back in his coat and shook my hand for a long while without saying anything, and they left. And Bridie did not leave with them. She stood in my front room in her coat. "I need you to understand what just happened," she said, and her voice was doing something I hadn't heard before. "That is the ledger. That's it, that's the actual thing. That's my whole family in one envelope. They love me, and they came 3 hours to close an account. I know, and you wouldn't take it." She was shaking. "Do you know what I felt when you said no? For about half a second, before anything else, I was disappointed. Because if you'd taken it, it would have been over. It would have been paid, and I could have stopped doing this arithmetic every single day for 4 months and just found out what I actually feel. Bridie, I wanted you to take my father's money so that I could be allowed to want you." She was crying now and furious about it. "That's the sentence. I've been trying not to arrive at that sentence since October." I did not say anything because there wasn't anything, and because I had learned by then that she does not want to be interrupted while she's getting to the bottom of something. "Say something." "I'm not going to." "Why not?" "Because anything I say right now lands on the side of the scale where I want it to land, and you'd never be able to tell afterward whether you got there on your own." I stayed where I was. "You've been doing arithmetic for 4 months. I'm not going to put my hand on the abacus at the last minute." She laughed wetly and horribly. "That is the single most infuriating, decent thing anyone has ever done to me. I'm aware." "Give me a week." she said. I gave her 9 days. I want to be honest about those 9 days because I did not handle them well internally, and I want that on the record alongside everything else. I did not contact her, which was correct. I also did almost no useful work, which was not. I ruined a plank on the lineman on day 3 by rushing a scarf joint, and then sat on the floor of the shop looking at it for about half an hour, because a 2-year restoration is a bad place to be impatient, and I had been impatient in the only part of my life where impatience shows up as physical evidence. My brother-in-law rang on day 6 about something else entirely, and got about 4 minutes in before he stopped. You've gone flat. What is it? There's a woman. There's been a woman since October, Wilder. The whole town knows there's a woman. What's happened? She's deciding something, and I've had to let her. There was a pause on the line. That's the right call, and it'll be horrible, he said. How long? 6 days. God. Another pause. Do you want me to come over and not talk about it? I did. He came over on day 7, and we worked on the lineman for 5 hours and discussed the scarf joint extensively and Bridie Sullivan not once. And it was the most useful thing anyone did for me that week. On the 9th day, she turned up at 4 in the afternoon with a document folder, which I have since learned is how Bridie Sullivan announces that something has been decided. I took the check. What? From my father. I called him on Sunday, and I told him I wanted it, and he sent it, and it cleared on Wednesday. She put the folder on the workbench. And on Thursday, I gave the entire amount to the county, restricted, into the footbridge replacement fund. It's matched. There's a state program. It's matched 2 to 1, so it's actually 3 times that number, and the county has committed to a full replacement with a design review. Construction starts in April. Here. She opened the folder. It was all in there. The deposit, the restriction letter, the county's acknowledgement, a drawing. I looked at it for a long time. You gave your father's money to a bridge. I gave it to the river. She was gripping the edge of the bench. Wilder, I needed to put it somewhere that wasn't you. I couldn't pay you, and I couldn't keep carrying it, and I couldn't ask you to hold it for me. So I put it in the only other place it belonged. What did your father say? He said, that's very like you, and then didn't speak for about 10 seconds, which for my father is a major emotional event. She almost smiled. And then he said he'd match it again privately if the county tried to underscope the design, which they did on Tuesday, and he did on Wednesday. And it's gone. She let go of the bench. The debt's gone. It went into a bridge. And I woke up on Friday morning, and it was gone, and I was still... She stopped and started again. I thought when it lifted, there'd be nothing underneath. That's what I've been frightened of for 4 months. That the whole thing was the debt, and if you took the debt away, I'd look at you and feel nothing. What did you feel? I drove here on Friday and sat in the lane for 40 minutes and didn't come in because it was worse. It was so much worse than gratitude. She was crying again and entirely unbothered about it this time. It's not imprinting. Ducklings don't do arithmetic for 4 months and then feel more. Say the actual sentence. You're going to make me say it. You've made yourself say every other hard sentence for 4 months without any help from me. I'd like this one out loud. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. I'm in love with you and it has nothing to do with the river, she said. I checked thoroughly. I built infrastructure. I crossed the shop. The kiss did not feel like gratitude. That was the first thing I knew, and I knew it before I knew anything else. There was nothing owed in it anywhere. It felt like an answer, like something she had crossed a river, a check, a county fund, and 4 months of arithmetic to arrive at, and had no intention of arriving at twice. She had a fist in the front of my work shirt. At some point, a chisel went off the bench, and neither of us went after it. We broke apart. She kept hold of the shirt. I have wanted to do that since the kettle, she said. You've mentioned the kettle twice now. The kettle was a significant morning for me, Wilder. We took it slowly after that, which was not a decision so much as a discovery. It turned out that 4 months of sitting on a crate in a boat shop had already done most of the work that couples usually spend a year on. There were things to sort out. Her family, principally. Aiden called me in February, and it was awkward for about 90 seconds, and then it wasn't. She told me what she did with it. She did the right thing. She did. A long pause. I've been thinking about what you said at the door. About settling. I didn't like it much at the time. I know. I've come round. Another pause, and I could hear him deciding whether to say it. Her mother and I have run our family like a set of books for 40 years. It's how we were raised, and I'd never once looked at it. Bridie's been paying us back for things since she was 14. He cleared his throat. So, that's mine to sit with, not yours. The bridge went up in April and May. Steel and concrete, proper railings, a design review that Bridie attended in person, and at which she said several things. I went down and watched them set the spans. So did about 60 other people, which surprised me until I thought about it. It's a crossing half the town uses, and it had been shut for 6 months, and everybody knew what had happened on it. Somebody's grandmother asked me at the barrier whether I was the boatman who'd pulled the teacher out. I am. You'll not get a moment's peace now, she said with enormous satisfaction. This town's been waiting 11 years for something to talk about. There's a small plate on the town end. It doesn't have her name on it, and it doesn't have mine. She fought about that. The county wanted to name it after me, which was the single worst idea anyone has ever had, and she killed it in a public meeting with an argument so efficient that 2 commissioners thanked her afterward. It says, replaced 2019, funded in part by a private gift in gratitude for the river. In gratitude for the river, I said when I first read it. Not to you. To the river. She was pleased with herself and not hiding it. It nearly took me, and it gave me you. It gets the credit. You get the boat shop. She moved in the following spring. The boathouse is not a sensible place for 2 people, and we have made it work by removing an interior wall I had been told for 11 years was structural and which turned out, when I finally opened it up, to be a partition somebody put in 1962 for no reason anyone can determine. Her class came back twice more. The boy who asked about steam bending finished 8th grade, went on to the high school, and turned up at the shop on his own the following summer asking whether I ever took anyone on. He's 19 now, and does 2 days a week and is better at scarf joints than I was at 25. Bridie has never once said, I told you so about that, which I consider a remarkable act of restraint given that she absolutely did. I asked her to marry me on the bridge, which is a far more obvious choice than I usually make, and I wanted on record that she saw it coming from about 200 yards away. You're walking strangely. I'm walking normally. Wilder, you've got something in your coat and you've been holding your elbow against it since the lane. So I stopped in the middle of the span and did it there, badly, over the sound of a river that was down for the summer and looked like nothing at all. Bridie, you spent 4 months trying to work out whether you wanted me or whether you owed me, and you built a bridge to find out. I got the ring out. Nobody's ever going to do anything like that for me again. Will you marry me? She said yes and then said, it's a very good bridge, and had to sit down on the deck of it. We married the following September on the bank below the boathouse, 40-odd people, most of the science department, and both her parents, who paid for the marquee and did not once mention that they had paid for the marquee, which I understood to be a real piece of work on their part. Aiden's toast was 4 sentences. I tried to pay this man and he wouldn't have it. Then my daughter took my money off me and spent it on public works, which is the most Bridie thing that has ever happened. He waited for it to settle. I've spent 40 years thinking a debt was a thing you cleared. Turns out some of them you're supposed to just carry, and they get lighter, and eventually you find out they were never debts at all. He sat down. Nuala cried. Bridie held my hand under the table hard enough to hurt. The sweater is hers now. It has been hers since the morning she stood in my kitchen in it and tried to do arithmetic on a river. It's worse than it was. The cuffs have gone, and there's a hole in the left elbow that she has repaired twice with wool that doesn't match, deliberately, because she says a mend should be visible, or it's a lie about what happened. She wears it in the shop in the winter, sitting on the same crate, marking papers 8 feet from where I work. I asked her once whether she ever thinks about that night. Constantly, she said, without looking up. Not the water, the kettle. Why the kettle? Because the water was 90 seconds and I don't remember most of it. She turned a page. The kettle was 20 minutes of standing in a stranger's kitchen, knowing something enormous had happened and having absolutely no idea what to do about it. And now? Now I know what to do about it. It took 4 months, a check, and a public works project. She looked up. Worth it. Have you ever had to prove to yourself that what you felt was real before you could let yourself have it? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.